is brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
Players are able to recall information under pressure when they understand the concept, and generally it's better done through open questioning. So, what are we trying to do here? And you want to breadcrumb them along to the answer. So, okay, that's an interesting point. What else are we trying to do? So you do need some bravery as a coach to ask questions, but I think it's super important in the learning of the players that they're involved in it in that kind of way, instead of just being told the answers. Because if you went to a test at school, you wouldn't just roll up with the answers. You need to think about the concepts. You need to know the concepts so that you can ace the exam.
Coach Liam Flynn has 26 years of experience coaching at the professional and junior elite levels in Australia, Germany, China, and New Zealand. Liam serves as a consultant for the Phoenix Suns on international and domestic players for the NBA draft, and he was an advanced scout for the Australian senior men's national team for the 2016 Rio Olympics. Coach Flynn provides individual player development for professional players with NBA, D-League, European, and international experience. He also helps clubs develop their own unique club curriculum, which ensures players and coaches are working from a shared philosophy towards a common goal. Liam holds a master's in sports coaching from the University of Queensland and has his NCAS Level 2 Coaching Accreditation. A passionate teacher of the game and a mentor to other coaches, Coach Liam Flynn has delivered coach education clinics in Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. Check out our website, hoopheadspod.com, where you can listen to every episode we've ever recorded, subscribe to our Hoopheads Pod newsletter, and learn more about our show. After you've checked out the site, don't forget to leave that 5-star rating and review on iTunes. You'll want to pay close attention and have your notebook handy as you listen to this episode of the Hoopheads Podcast with Australia's Coach Liam Flynn.
Hello and welcome to the Hoopheads Podcast. It's Mike Klinzing here with my co-host Jason Sunkel. And tonight we are pleased to welcome all the way from Australia, Coach Liam Flynn. Liam, welcome.
Thanks, guys. Great to be here.
We are very excited to have you on the show and get to know a little bit more about you and your basketball journey. So we're going to start there with how you got into the game of basketball as a young kid.
Oh, wow. That was a long time ago. I guess when I was around 12 years old, I started playing the game, which is probably kind of late for most kids. So I started playing, and then the next year I wanted to start coaching. So as a 13-year-old, I coached the mighty under-10 Sunnybank Tigers, and was still playing there at the same time up until I was about 15, and I realized how much of a terrible basketball player I was, and that maybe coaching was where it was at. So I retired from playing at the grand old age of 15 and just kept coaching, and lucky enough to do it now full time.
What was it that you liked about coaching?
I think I felt like I was having more of an impact as a player. Like I said, I kind of wasn't very athletic, didn't make any representative teams. If I was on a team, I was, coming off the bench and didn't really make that much of an impact on the team. Whereas, with a coach, as being a coach, I was able to, help players get better. I was, leading practices, and even though it was at the under 10 age group, you're still making an impact and helping people. So I enjoyed that side of things much more than kind of rotting away on the end of a bench as a player.
And so as you've kind of evolved in your coaching career, I know you've had an opportunity to coach at all different levels, obviously starting when you were younger with that younger age group and working your way all up to professional players. So talk a little bit about some of those different experiences you've had at the younger age groups all the way on up to the professional level, and talk about maybe some of the experiences that you've had as a coach.
Well, I think I find it very fortunate that I was able to start all the way to the lowest age group here in Australia, under 10s. So, I was able to learn how to teach the game, to formulate what I was thinking in strategic terms, but be able to bring those down into concepts that younger players could understand. So, as I progressed through the age groups, the the tactics that I thought about became a little bit more complex, and then I had to communicate those to young players, and on and on through the age groups, and then into semi-professional and professional. So I feel like I've kind of done a gradual journey. I've built my career that way, that I don't just go straight to the top. I've worked my way all the way through, and kind of funnily enough, even though I coach at the professional level now, a lot of the concepts, a lot of the teaching points, even a lot of the drills that I did back with junior players, they're still really effective with the pros. So I feel like I've been fortunate to have that gradual journey.
So speaking of the, you talked about how they start with the youngest group being under 10s. Can you just talk a little bit about how the system is set up over in Australia? Obviously, it's probably very different than what it is here in America. So just kind of give our listeners a little bit of insight on how it's structured there.
Sure. The way basketball is organised is generally through a club system here. So the clubs will generally start playing organised basketball from under 10s. So that's kids 8 and 9 years old. And they'll offer basketball all the way up to the under 18 age group. There is school basketball, and in some cities it's much bigger and much more prestigious than others. But generally, if you want to play for Australia, if you want to have an opportunity to go to the professional level, get a scholarship at the Centre of Excellence, you go through the club system. There's introduction levels for the game as young as 5-year-olds. So the Aussie Hoops program allow kids to come in at 5 years old, and that's like modified basketball, skill work, game sense practices. But the real stuff starts at under 10s, and it's through the club system, and kids progress through the ages. And there's some milestone age groups like under 16s and under 18s where kids are able to try out for their state. So each state has a team, and they play a national championship at the under 16, under 18 and under 20 level. So that's kind of a brief snapshot of our basketball system.
How does a kid get selected by a club, or how does a club select a kid at that age 8 or 9 level? In other words, how does it come to be that a kid plays for one club and not another club?
Yeah, so a lot of that is proximity. So you go to the closest club, and a lot of those clubs have competitions underneath their age group. So they'll have a representative team for the under 12 age group, and they'll have a competition where all the under 12s from that region play in different teams, so that they can pick out the best kids for their under 12 representative team. So that's quite common in a lot of cities. In the city that I reside in, the off season, they actually cut out that stage. They just go straight to offering representative teams. So generally kids go to clubs that are closest. Sometimes they'll drive past the closest club to go to a club that has a reputation for developing players. So that's quite common, but it's not a free-for-all, go and recruit kids all over the place. It's not really like that in Australia. You generally go to the club that's closest, or the closest club that has a reputation for developing kids.
Gotcha. So it's based on geography as opposed to me recruiting somebody from all across the entire country.
Right. Because our country, funnily enough, is almost the biggest land size as the US. And in between the cities, there's not a lot, there's not a lot of inhabitable land. So, traveling between large capital cities is quite difficult. So that's why kids stay in their capital city. They stay in the club that's closest to them. The Australian clubs do a really good job. The amount of, I would say there's 90% of coaches in Australia are volunteer coaches. They do a fantastic job of developing kids.
So how do those volunteer coaches get trained to be able to work with the youth players in Australia? So to talk about the coach education that's available to those volunteer coaches.
Varies. Some clubs are very well organised where they have a director of coaching, and that person could be full-time, they could be part-time. So for instance, the junior club that I have done a lot of work with is Sturt. They have a director of coaching who's full-time, who manages both age groups. But there's some other clubs that have part-time people. That person is responsible for helping out coaches And depending on their expertise and the time they're available, sometimes they're able to do a really good job. Other times, they might be stretched in so many different ways as the full-time basketball administrator that they're not able to always help out as much as they'd like to in coach education. So there's that component from the club. But I think Australians by nature, we're quite thirsty for knowledge. And so a lot of coaches are very much using online mediums to broaden their education of the game. They're watching film. They've got a great interest in basketball from all over the world. So there's a lot of self-starter coaches in Australia.
Yeah, that's certainly much more feasible than it used to be, when you can go online and find pretty much any resource that you would want to find, especially if you're willing to shell out a few bucks. You can find just about any type of X's and O's, and I'm sure culture stuff that you'd want to find to be able to build up your coaching resume. What's the current state of popularity of basketball in Australia? How would you describe the popularity of the sport right now?
I think it's at a really healthy place. We recently, in the last 3 or 4 years, had a new owner come on board to purchase our professional league. And as most countries are, your professional league is the front door for your sport to the wider community. So we've always had really healthy numbers in development in Australia at the grassroots level, but there was a disconnect between the grassroots and the professional league. And now that has very much been closed, where there's a great bridge between junior development into our second division teams and now into the top tier leagues. So of course there's more work to do, but I think it's a really good spot. We've had the most amount of NBA players ever at the moment with, I think it's 12 Australians in the NBA now. So
we love Delhi, man. We love Delhi.
I love him too. I just love the way he goes about it. He's he definitely has the Australian culture when he plays. You squeeze every little bit out of your talent, whatever talent that is, your team first. You take your work seriously, but you don't take yourself seriously. So, he really embodies that Aussie spirit.
Yeah, that's for sure something that I think any player, no matter what your talent level, if you can adopt that philosophy where you're trying to get the most out of what you have, no matter what your talent level, you're going to end up in a pretty good spot. And I think he's certainly been able to do that, and obviously won a title with us here in Cleveland. So we were big fans at that time, and now he's back here after being in Milwaukee for a little bit. So we're glad to have him back for sure. You mentioned that now there's a bigger connection between the top professional league and the grassroots basketball, and you said that there's still some things to be done. The connections are better, but there's still some work to be done. What would you envision if you could design, I guess, a perfect system or one or two improvements that you'd like to see from your perspective to strengthen the game across all levels, down from the grassroots all the way up to the professional level? What would you like to see happen to make the game better there in Australia?
Oh, that's a great question. I think at the moment there's a lot of our talented under 18 through to, say, under 22 players generally go to the US college system. And that's a lot of the times their only option to prolong their basketball career and get intensive player development training. So, that's where recently the professional league here purchased one of the second division leagues and is looking to strengthen that bridge between junior basketball and professional ranks. So I'd like to see that continue to happen, where it's not just one second division that's been that offers opportunities for those players, but all of the second leagues throughout the country. And I think when that happens, there will be a great opportunity for a lot of those players to develop on home shores, or at least if they go to college and they come back and they're just not quite ready to play professionally, that they have a league that will continue to develop them until they are ready. So I see those things happening. I see that the owners of the professional league here are really passionate about developing those young players, 18 through 22, 25. But I guess the other big opportunity for us in Australia is continuing to offer great coach education, because again, that I think a lot of it is driven by the coaches themselves to want to get better, and we'd like to, I guess, offer something that's more like they have in Spain, where it's like an academy system or a license system, where it's very structured of, how coaches are educated, what steps they have to achieve to coach at certain levels. So I think that would be terrific if we could bring that on board as well.
Yeah, that'd be great. The USA Basketball is trying to do that here and really go down to, like we talked about earlier, with the volunteer coaches and get people to get their license and get some degree of coaching education so that when they step in front of a group of kids, they have an idea of what it is that they're doing. At least there's, a baseline of knowledge, both in terms of X's and O's of the game and drills that they can teach, and also just how you interact with kids. I think that's one of the things that is really overlooked is sometimes coaches may have some technical expertise, whether it's from their own playing career or coaching experience or looking at something online. But a lot of times people forget that the relationship part of coaching and understanding how to interact with kids at different ages and how to get the most out of them. That's one of the things that I always think that a lot of coaches, especially on the volunteer level, don't always think about. They're so concerned about, well, what drill should I use and what offense should I teach and how do I get my kids to play this particular defense? And they forget that there's also a lot of human interaction that goes into building a successful team and really helping a kid to improve. Do you see some of that in Australia as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I see that everywhere where I go and coach. That I absolutely agree, Mike, that it's the teaching of the game that we can do better. I always say if you have two teams with the same budget and the same amount of talent, that the program that has a teaching and learning environment will win more often than the other team, even without switching out players or spending more money. If you have a learning environment, you're going to have more success. And you're right, a lot of sometimes as coaches we can get bogged down in the best drill or the best set play, when it's how we teach is just as important as what we teach. It's teaching the kids the concepts of the game, so things like spacing and tempo and creating advantages, those kind of concepts that they'll be great players if they know them in any system. So whether they play a pick and roll heavy system or they play a system where the ball goes in the low post a lot, if they know the concepts of the game, then it doesn't matter what system they play in. So that's something that I'm really passionate about, is helping our coaches become better teachers and to just think about that when they coach, because sometimes if you don't know what you don't know. So just highlighting those things to the coaches, they think, oh, that's right, it's not just about what drill we're doing, it's how I communicate the concepts. It's about having my verbal cues all set, that I'm not waffling on with long sentences and that. So I definitely like to try and educate our coaches about that stuff.
Talk a little bit about how you would go about, you mentioned teaching concepts. And that's one of the things that sometimes I think coaches have difficulty figuring out. Do I teach a skill in isolation, or do I teach it within the concept of the game? So for example, if I'm going to teach a screen and roll, do I just put 4 players on the floor and have them work on the screen and roll, or am I working that in a 3-on-3 or a 4-on-4, more of a live scrimmage type situation? So which one of those, I don't know, philosophies, obviously there's a place for both of them, but just when you go about teaching a concept or talk about teaching a concept in the game of basketball, what's your preferred method of doing that?
So there's a few things to unpack there. Definitely when what you're talking about with teaching skill and teaching the application of the skill, I think there's room for both no defense but then straight away to add a progression of defense. So let's say we're talking about teaching how to pass the ball into the pocket, like a pocket pass in the pick and roll. There's definitely going to be time, especially at the start, where we want to introduce what the pass is with some context. So we might use 2-on-2, 3-on-3, and say this is the read that we're using when we come off the pick and roll, and this is why we use the pocket pass. And then there'll be a section where we take the defense out and we actually work on the technical detail of which foot to step with and how we follow through with our hand and yada, yada, yada. But then we want to quickly get back to defense involved again. So it might not be at 100%, but it might be what we call dummy defense. So it's in there at a tempo that's hard enough to challenge the offense, but not 100%. So, and then we phase the defense. So, okay, now defense, we want you to play at full speed, but there's only 2 of you and it's 2 on 2. And then it might be we play 5 and 5 at, a reduced tempo just to learn the reads and where the pocket pass comes into play. So I definitely think you need context. You need to introduce the skill with context. You do need to rehearse the skill and learn the nuances on the skill, possibly without defense, but then straight away you want to get the defense back on the floor and you want to see how it all works in the large machine instead of just, okay, let's do 100 left-handed pocket passes without any context, without any visual cues, any reaction from the defense. So that's kind of how I would talk about skill development. With the concepts of the game, that's more to me like the broader team concepts. So on the offensive end, like I mentioned, things like spacing and creating advantages. I think those concepts are really important to learn early on in your preparation, because they will, the better your kids know the concepts, the better they'll be able to run any offense you put in. So you need to know how to play the game before you learn what to play.
So what's your philosophy from a youth standpoint in terms of what would you like to see youth coaches, what are some basic concepts to teach them on offense and teach them on defense that you think are really important to build up as baseline skills for kids as they move up through the system? So I start with 8 and 9-year-olds. What are some of the basic key concepts on offense and defense that you would hope that after going through a season or two that those kids would have a good understanding of?
Right. So the first 2 concepts that I would always introduce to a team is that we want spacing before we create an advantage and an advantage before we shoot. So we want to space the floor, and with the younger kids, that involves teaching them the floor spots. So this is the corner, this is the wing, this is the elbow. So every spot on the floor has a name. And you can do that as easily as enough as every kid has a basketball and you call out a spot on the floor and they have to dribble to that spot with their left hand. So they get some skill development, but then they also learn about places on the court. But then, moving that into a spacing concept, now that they have these floor spots, this is generally where we want you to play from when you're on the floor. So we don't want you to be in between spots. We don't want you to stand in each other's way. We want to spread the floor. And the reason for that is we want to make it difficult for the defense. So it's like really, really basic concepts that the kids got to get in their head first before they even start, trying to break someone down one-on-one or do anything where there's screening or cutting or moving. It's let's just spread out. Let's make it really difficult for the defense. And then we teach them about we want to create an advantage. So the thing about basketball is it's a team game, and we can use your teammates to create advantages to get someone an open shot. So we talk about advantages like a numerical advantage, like a 2-on-1 fast break or off-balance defenders. So we teach them about creating an advantage, and then once we have that advantage, then we want to shoot. So that's just they're kind of like the foundations of offense to me, is that the concept of spacing before advantage and advantage before shot.
Love that. I love what you said about teaching the kids positioning on the court and how you said have them dribble to that spot, because it would be very easy. And this is one of the things that I think inexperienced coaches sometimes do, and sometimes experienced coaches as well, is if I was going to teach a kid a spot on the floor, I might just say, okay, here's the wing. And I go stand there and point to it and show them. And the kids are all standing there not doing anything. Whereas what you just described, which is a very, very simple thing, but it makes a huge difference in that now not only are the kids learning the position on the court, but to your point, they're also getting some skill development by having to dribble there. I know one of the things that I've done, and I actually picked this up probably within the last year, and I can't remember where I got it from, but just to be able to teach lines on the court to kids who are 5 or 6 years old, and you start them in the center, and then you would just go ahead and say, okay, everybody dribble to the baseline, or everybody dribble to the 3-point line, or everybody, dribble your basketball into the key. And for kids who are 5, 6, 7 years old who are just getting introduced to the game, they're going to be much more likely to remember it. Plus, they're getting a chance to dribble the ball. So I love that particular concept, and I love the idea of teaching spacing because, as we all know, when the ball is out there, what do kids all tend to do? Everybody's following that basketball around. So if you can teach them spacing on offense at a young age, I think you're right on point. What about defensively for those young kids? What are some things that you want to teach conceptually for those 8, 9-year-olds?
Well, I guess, it's when they're young, just having something as simple as, why we play defense, like what a good possession of defense is. Now, that's going to get more complicated as you get older, but, generally with little kids, it's about, well, let's make it difficult for the offense. So on the offensive end, we wanted to make it difficult for the defense. Well, it's the same the other way. So it's more difficult for the offense if we're actually all back and all in front of them. It's more difficult for the offense if we guard one player each and we try and keep one player each throughout the whole possession. It's more difficult for the offense if we build pressure on the ball instead of just reaching for the ball and letting them go past us, or conversely standing 2 meters off the ball. It's more difficult for the offense if they only get one shot at the basket, if we grab the ball at the end. So, we're not just teaching them about technical nuances like the placement of the feet and the gap between them and the ball. It's like that concept of let's make it difficult for the offense, and that you can always go back to that concept. So, for instance, a kid who there's a missed shot from the offense, there's an outlet pass, and the kid that just kind of dives through a lane, with a really low percentage play trying to steal it, we're saying, well, that's not really making it difficult for the offense. That low percentage dive through the lane has made it easier for them because now they're attacking us 5-on-4. So again, once they have the concept, you can add all the technical details, all the teaching points, and all the different defensive coverages you want behind that, because they know, we're trying to make it difficult for the offense. And then, as you progress through the ages, you can make that a little bit more specific, like these are the kind of shots we want to force. These are the ones we're okay to, allow. So the long contested 2 off the bounce with a rear view contest, we're okay with that one. So, you can kind of layer it on top of your original theme of let's just make it really difficult for them.
Registration is now open at www.headstartbasketball.com for this summer's Head Start basketball camps. We'll be hosting camps this summer in Strongsville, Westlake, Avon Lake, Oberlin, Brunswick, Highland Heights, Mentor, and Hudson. At Head Start Basketball, we care deeply about making a positive impact on the lives of young basketball players, both on and off the court. It's through building strong relationships with our players, parents, and coaching staff that we are able to use the game of basketball to enrich the lives of those we interact with, both inside and outside of our organization. We believe that our attention to detail, our growth mindset, and our commitment to lifelong learning allows us to help our players achieve their fullest potential. We are passionately committed to providing players, parents, and coaches with everything they need to reach their goals. These core values run through everything we do. Check out our website, www.headstartbasketball.com, and discover why you should attend a Head Start basketball camp this summer. Hope to see you there.
How much time do you spend in your coaching, both now and when you coached at lower levels, explaining the why to the players that you're coaching? So obviously you're teaching a concept. How much time do you spend asking them, hey, why do we do this? And then explaining why you do it.
Well, that's a really important point, asking them. I think I did a master's in sports coaching 3 years ago, and I think it had the biggest impact on my coaching because I learned about open questioning, that we should be asking questions instead of just spilling forward knowledge to our players and hoping they download information. So I'll always ask a lot of questions. Those that have seen my coaching videos will see me asking the players a lot of questions. And that also means that as a coach, you need to be prepared. You're going to get some answers that you don't want to hear, or
Absolutely.
you do. But like there's been a lot of studies about how players are able to recall information under pressure when they understand the concept, and generally it's better done through open questioning. So, what are we trying to do here? And you want to breadcrumb them along to the answer. So, okay, that's an interesting point. What else are we trying to do? So you do need some bravery as a coach to ask questions, but I think it's super important in the learning of the players that they're involved in it in that kind of way, instead of just being told the answers. Because if you went to a test at school, you wouldn't just roll up with the answers. You need to think about the concepts. You need to know the concepts so that you can ace the exam.
Yeah, I think that's a lot different than maybe it used to be, where you had sort of the coach as the holder of all the power and the players were kind of underneath the coach. I think that's shifted tremendously over the last, let's say, 10 or so years, where now coaches are looking to empower the players, give them an opportunity to answer those questions as opposed to just being looked upon as the ultimate authority. And I think the learning process has greatly improved, which is what you're getting at, that by asking questions, a lot of times I think coaches who are maybe less experienced feel like, ooh, I'm giving away some of my control of the team, where in actuality what you're doing is you're empowering those players to better understand and conceptualize and really bring in what they know, and therefore making them better players and ultimately making your team better. And so I think the coach education piece that we've been able to all have access to in today's basketball world, I think has made the game much, much stronger. And so to that point, let's talk a little bit about your club curriculum program that you have, where you go in and work with some of the clubs to help them design their overall philosophy and make sure that they're on point with what they're trying to accomplish. Talk a little bit about what that service entails and what you do for the clubs that would hire you.
Sure. We start always with, I meet with the key stakeholders in the club and ask them, what are the values of the club? So, if someone walked into a basketball stadium and they saw your teams play, what kind of adjectives or descriptions would they use about your club and your style of play? So, are you an aggressive team? Are you a fast-paced team? And you can't be everything, but let's really get down to what the values are of your club. And then we can flush out everything after that. So we start with that. Then we talk about how is that going to manifest itself in the way that you play basketball. So, for instance, one of my clients is from a working class blue collar area in Adelaide. So they want their teams to play that dour defensive mind, that kind of style of game. So that means that we're not going to be playing containment in the half court style of game. We're talking about three-quarter court, position pressure, grind you down. So, we start with the values and we move into the style of play of what it's going to generally look like on the offensive and defensive end. And once we have a really clear understanding of that, then I start breaking the game down into its components. So if a club has said, look, we want to be a club that shares the ball, well, we need to figure out how that's going to manifest itself in every component of the game. So everything from fast breaking, that means we're going to be passing the ball ahead more than driving the ball up the floor. In the half-court offense, it means that when we play pick and roll, it's going to be more attacking with the pass than players trying to get downhill. And of course, that might change a little bit depending on the defensive coverage, but they've got that style of play of how they want things to be on offense, and that's got to flow through every component of the game, both on offense and defense. So
explain why is that so important? I mean, I get why it's so important, but somebody who's out there listening may not understand. Why is it so important for the club to have an overarching philosophy in terms of style of play in your mind so that it goes across all their teams? Explain why that's so important.
I think there's a few reasons. I think it's helpful for the players. So if they know that that's the way that the club plays, it's so much easier for them to know how they should be playing. So again, I go back to that example of, let's say it's a club that wants to be a full court pressure style. That's our club. You walk into a stadium, you know that we're full court man to man, run and jump, pressuring the ball. Then every player that goes to that club knows that they need to be conditioned that way. They need to defend in that manner. And it removes any doubt of what I should or shouldn't do. It's no, this is how we play it here. What we also like to do with the curriculum is have the teaching points consistent through the age groups. So again, that under 12 player who's learning how to play that full court pressure style defense, all the teaching points and the language translates to when he goes to under 14. So he doesn't have to relearn another language. So you can only have that when you have consistency through the whole club. And I think it also helps the coaches where, again, they know that what the club's about. They know how they should be structuring their practices, how they should be teaching the game, because there's an overall style of play that the club likes to play. Now, that's not to say that we can't introduce them to other styles and we won't at times play other styles, but I use the example that there's some, when you buy a house in a housing development, some places, there's a certain way that each house needs to be. It needs to be 2 stories, 1 carport, mailbox in the front yard. Now, that's the style of housing everyone's got to have, but the coat of paint you put on the house, the kind of veranda you have, what you drive, what the mailboxes look like, that's up to the coach to decide his flavor or how he's going to teach it. But there's got to be a consistent way with how things are done for both the benefit of the players and the benefit of the coaches.
Yeah, I think that by putting everything together where you have the same coaching philosophy, where you have the same key teaching points, it also makes it just so much more consistent for the kid as they move from one level to the next. They're not having to relearn terminology. They're not having to relearn concepts. The concepts can build on previous concepts, just like it would in a school setting, or, you're learning math and one topic builds on the other. And basketball should, in theory, be the same way. But we all know, I'm sure, just like it is here in the United States and Australia, there's a lot of cases where it's not set up in that way, where one year you're on a team that walks the ball up the floor and the coach plays a 2-3 zone, and the next year you're playing for a team that runs up and down the floor and is playing pressure man-to-man defense, full court. And so as a kid, you're not getting that, you're not getting that consistency that I think makes a big difference in terms of not only the success of the player, but also, I'm sure, the success of the club as well.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think sometimes because basketball isn't thought of in the same terms of, math or science, where it is a knowledge that the kids have to acquire. It needs to be taught to them. They need to rehearse it. They need to learn it. So back to your point about math, you wouldn't just send a teacher into a classroom and say, go teach maths. There would be a curriculum. There would be a flow of ideas. So exactly what you said, the simple ideas of arithmetic would be built on them by long division and then algebra. So, basketball should be thought of in the same way. So, we need to give our coaches support and to teach them about the teaching process, because a lot of them aren't teachers and they need that support. And that's, I guess, a lot of what my service is.
So how do you go about doing that? Is that something that you do in person on the court? Is that something that you provide through a document and video, some combination of that? How do you go about actually teaching the club coaches how to get that solid philosophy throughout the entire club?
Yeah, so after we break the game down into the components, then each component I work with the coaching director on the teaching points that the club will use to teach each component of the game. So again, if it's fast breaking, the teaching points might be, lane runners to the corners, kick ahead passes, ball carried in the slot, whatever the teaching points are. And then we'll break those teaching points down to even smaller 1-word or 2-word cues, like verbal cues. So the verbal cue for the lane runners going to the corners might just be corners. So we've taught them why they should run wide, about spacing. So we've given them the concept. We have the teaching point of lane runners to the corners, and now we have the verbal cue that we force. And then once all that's done, we do have it. I do put it in a document that goes for, depending on, it changes from club to club. It's around 80 or 90 pages. So they have a booklet that at any time they can refer to. But also knowing that people these days are much more open to, video medium. We film sessions. So I'll go to the club. We will film the workshop of all the components. And then I will also do actual workshop with the coaches. So, today I'll come down to a certain club and we're going to learn about how we're going to teach half-court defense as per the curriculum. So they get everything. They get the document, they get the video, they get the coaching workshops, and then they also get personal visits from me where I'll go to the session and evaluate the way they coach, so that hopefully I can help them get more drill out of the drill and more practice out of the practice.
What's the typical size of a club in Australia? So are we talking about one team per age level? Are we talking about bigger clubs that have multiple teams per age level? Just give us an idea of what the size of a typical club might be.
It does vary, but generally they would have more than one team in each age level. So at least 2. Some clubs have up to 7 because they've got so many kids at their club and they have resources that they can get enough coaches for 5, 6, 7 teams. So that's not uncommon at the bigger clubs to have that many kids and that many coaches. And then again, underneath that would be a full competition of under 12. So, there might be 5 under 12 representative teams, but then there's an under 12 competition which have another 10 teams. So there's a lot of teams, and that means that you need to be well organized. And so having a curriculum that everyone can refer to is, it's super important, so that player in the under 12 Division 5 team is getting a good experience, when he comes out basketball practice.
Yeah, I can see where, especially when you onboard a new player or you onboard a new coach, to be able to have that document available, the curriculum itself, and then also to be able to have the video of you in there doing the teaching of the different skills and the cues and the concepts and all that, I think would be tremendously valuable to any club. I think that's one of the things that here in the United States, in a lot of cases, that is lacking. We have here in the spring, it's our AAU season, which is basically our non-school basketball season. And for a lot of those, we have private clubs that run those particular teams. And in a lot of cases, each individual coach has completely their own philosophy. There's a complete autonomy on the part of that coach to do and run and do whatever they want in terms of offensively, defensively, and there's no necessarily set philosophy. And I can see where if you could get all of your teams on board with the same teaching points, and I think more importantly, the coach education piece of it is so important, because if you get all the coaches, teaching the same thing, but then I think even more importantly is not what you teach, but how you're teaching the game is so critically important. And that's how you're going to get the most out of your players and really help your team to succeed. And that's one of the things that I think we don't do a great job of here in the United States, is getting everybody sort of on the same page in terms of how we're teaching the game. And it sounds like that's the direction that you're trying to head with all the things that you're doing.
Yeah, and it's important to note that it's not like we want the coaches to be robots and only do one style, because sometimes a certain age group will have a different composition of players where you do need to make some changes. You might need to play a fraction slower because you've got 3 kids who are 6'10", and it makes more sense to play that way. But what you don't want is that they play a completely different style to the rest of the club. And I think that's where the best clubs are able to give their coaches some freedom of let's use the curriculum as our foundation and how we want to play. But if there's that 10 or 15% of the game where I need to tinker with it to get the best out of my kids, well, I've got that leniency. And we also give them the freedom of this is how we want you to coach, this is how we want you to teach. But similar to a math teacher, how they teach algebra for that class might be one teacher uses iPads for all the kids to learn the same concept, and one teacher uses the blackboard and quizzes. So, how you do it, you can use your own personal flair, but in general, we've given them a structure of how to do things and the way we want it to be done. So, I think that we're trying to find that best balance of giving everyone resources, but also allowing them to have their personal flair and to tinker with the game around the sides to get the best out of their teams.
Talk a little bit about your experience with coaches coaching at different levels. So one of the things that I find interesting is that a lot of times people equate coaches who coach at a higher level as being better coaches. And I always maintain that there are some people who might be, for example, here in the United States, somebody who might be a high school coach and somebody who might coach fourth graders. And it's entirely possible that the coach who works with fourth graders might actually be a, quote, better coach. And I think one of the things that sometimes is lost on the general public is the fact that it's important to match up a coach's strengths with the age group that they're coaching, because there's a big difference between being able to teach an 8-year-old basketball concepts and being able to coach a high school team. And so to me, it always is important if I'm a coach to be able to find the level of player, the age of the player that matches up best with my strengths. Do you see that in some of the things and experiences that you've had there in Australia?
Oh, absolutely. I think there's great coaching and there's poor coaching at every level. It doesn't mean that if you're coaching professionally that you're a better basketball coach than the under 14 coach down. It's just, I guess like in my experience, I was just lucky that I got some breaks and was able to make this a career. But I know that there's so many great coaches in Australia who are, full-time professionals in, their normal job, they're accountants, they're lawyers, they're manager of the retail store, but they're great coaches, volunteering their times. So I think you can learn from coaches of all age groups. I think back last term when I came back from coaching in China, I was coaching at my daughter's Aussie hoop session, which is sessions for 5 to 10-year-olds. And one of the coaches did a drill, which I will now use with the next professional team I use. Just a great way of, a great teaching point of explaining, how to dribble the ball in a stance. Like he said, you should be on the surfboard. And I was like, that's perfect. Like I'm going to rip that off and use that for the pros. So I just think you can learn from everyone. And there's just so many great coaches around the world and in different countries as well. I've been really lucky to see practices in all different countries and at all different levels, and you can learn something from everyone. And whether that's a lot of the times it's something that you want to do, and sometimes it's like, I see what that coach is doing and I respect that he wants to do it that way, but I like the way I'm doing it. And that's learning as well. Learning that what you are doing, you like what you're doing.
What's been your most unique experience outside of Australia? I know you've been in Germany and China. So what are your experiences outside of Australia that have really either opened your eyes or just something that you were maybe surprised by when you were in those places?
I think that the biggest thing I learned was how much the actual culture of the country affects the style of basketball or impacts that. So, I've been lucky to coach in different countries where culturally they have differences to Australia, and that's impacted how the game is played. So, for instance, in Germany, I think the schooling system's quite important. people in general are highly intellectual. So when you play basketball in Germany, it's with the highest of basketball IQ. So even if you go down to third division in Germany, which is semi-professional, tactically the sophistication of the tactics is what it would be in the first division in other countries. So that's been a really cool thing about being fortunate enough to go to different countries, is that there is cultural differences. You know, the Spanish they have a flair and a passion for life, and you see that on the basketball court. They're creative, and you know, it's really cool how you get to experience that.
Yeah, I think getting a chance to see other coaches and see other places in the world and how they do things always is enlightening. And you made a great point when you were talking a minute ago about seeing things in another coach's practice, and some of the stuff you're immediately taken to and are like, wow, that's fantastic. I'm going to steal that and use that for the rest of my coaching career. And then there are other things that you see and you're like, yeah, I don't know if I would do it in that exact same way. And that's really how we grow and learn as coaches. And in a lot of cases now, not only can we do that in person, but through the use of, you know, video over the internet, we can find those resources all over the place. Is there anything else from the club curriculum side of it that you want to share with us about that service before we move on to the next topic?
No, I think, you know, regardless of whether you have a formal service at your club, I just think it's really important that you have a starting point for your club about how you want your teams to play, and to have a style, and then have resources for your coaches. So how that manifests itself, whether you do it internally, you get an external person to help you out, or a mixture of both. I just think it's really important, because in general terms, whatever country I go to, the coaches need more resources, and we should help them out, because that then flows on to a better customer service for your players.
If you're a basketball coach in the greater Cleveland area and you have a passion for teaching the game and might be interested in joining the Head Start Basketball Camp coaching staff this summer, please reach out to us via email at headstartbasketball@usa.net.
Let's talk a little bit about how you've gotten involved with the NBA. I know you've done some work for the Phoenix Suns, and I know you also have your NBA tours that you go on. So can you talk a little bit about just how you got connected with the NBA, and what are some of the things that you've been fortunate enough to have the opportunity to do?
Yeah, I guess I've been, you know, really lucky that I've been able to meet a lot of people over the years, and you know, generally I find people in the NBA, like, they are just really curious about basketball. They want to know what's the best methods, what's everyone doing outside of the NBA. So been super fortunate to grow good relationships, and sometimes that's been a contract, like in the case of Phoenix or some other teams that I've done contracts with, or sometimes it's just being able to go and visit an organization and watch, you know, practice closely, or just have a meal with coaches and swap ideas. So, you know, that's just the great thing about the NBA. It is the pinnacle of basketball. It's the greatest league in the world, but you know, by and large, the people in there are very down to earth and very curious. So I've been lucky over the years to tap into that a little bit. And I guess 4 years ago, I out how I can share those opportunities more with coaches from around the world, and had some coaching buddies always say, hey, can you take us with you on your next time you go over to the States? So eventually I started doing that, and you know, I run a small tour. It's a very much a boutique thing. I like only having a small group so that we can have really in-depth conversations with our NBA guys. So, you know, this is coming up to my 4th year, and I'm lucky that it keeps going. It keeps selling out each year. And like the most important thing is that I always leave the tour with 15, 20, 25 pages of notes of, you know, learnings and, you know, friendships with these tour members that I'll have, you know, lifelong, that I can still email tour participants from the first year and swap ideas, or I see some guys over years get their own contracts in the NBA, or get closer to NBA personnel themselves, and that's always awesome to see.
What are the stops on the tour this year?
Well, we only go to Summer League each year, so there's one stop, and it's Las Vegas, and so we go there every July, and we just meet as a bunch of people. So there's about a dozen formal meetings where it's the tour members and an NBA staff, and that could be someone from up to a general manager, a head coach, all the way down to a video coordinator or a scout. So I try and give them an idea of the whole machine of an. So we'll have formal meetings. We'll have some informal meetings down at the gym or over a coffee or a beer or something after hours, and then we'll also go some practices. So everything from team practices to individual workouts. So they get a really good snapshot of what the industry is about, and most importantly, they get to learn a bunch from people. And the good thing for the NBA guys is they also get some contacts in different countries that maybe they didn't have. So years down the track, they might be able to email that coach and say, hey, we know you've got an NBA prospect in your city. Can you give us some intel? So it's been a really positive experience, and I'm just fortunate it keeps going on.
How often do NBA guys get to Australia?
It's getting more and more common. I think with the improvement in our league, guys have come down, and you'll see most clubs will at least make one visit to Australia and check out the league. And, especially in the last 2 years where you've had the Bowen kid at Sydney, you've had Terence Ferguson at Adelaide. So you've had those guys who bypassed playing in college, went and played in Australia, but also some guys who were draft picks that didn't play straight away in the NBA. They came back and played in Australia. So James Ennis comes to mind. So, it's definitely common. We're really lucky that we've got the Centre of Excellence here, which is just an absolute factory of producing high-level Australian basketballers. So most of the kids that are in the NBA from Australia came through the Centre of Excellence. So, you'll have NBA guys come down and, or at least, speak to the coaches about that, check out the game. So, it's becoming more and more common.
Talk a little bit about that Center of Excellence. Explain to us exactly what that is and what it entails.
So that there's the Centre of Excellence is in Canberra, and that's the capital of Australia. So they select a small amount of athletes each year. I'm not sure the exact number. I think it's 8 to 12 each year that get selected, and they are essentially full-time athletes for that calendar year. And there's also the NBA Global Academy that trains along, which again would have a similar amount of players, but they'll have some Australian players, but then they have a bunch of players from overseas. So Argentina and China and, different, India, I think, had a player as well. So there's those two academies based in Canberra. And like I said, they're full-time athletes. They're housed on campus. They're fed the best food available, and they 2-3 times a day. So it's a great way of developing the players. And then once they graduate from the Centre of Excellence program, they move on to either the professional league here or overseas, or they go to the college system.
What age group do kids start there? Is that a high school age, like a 15, 16-year-old that gets selected, or what's the age selection point?
Yeah, it is around that age group. I think it's probably closer to 17, 18, 19. So like high school, probably they'd be like a junior and a senior. So they would do 1 or 2 years at the Centre of Excellence, and then they would go to US college or professional after that.
Excellent. All right, let's jump into your videos and talk a little bit about what you have going there and explain to people how they can get their hands on it, and if they do get their hands on it, what they can expect from the videos that you've been able to put together.
So they can get the videos from my website, which is coachliamflynn.com, and I've got 4 videos on there now. One is from the Cleveland Cavs assistant coach, Mike Longobardi, from his tour, which he covers a whole range of topics, but transition defense, half-court defense, pick and roll offense. But then there'll be 3 videos of mine in there. One that's a general concepts, offensive principles, player development type video. And then the other 2 videos are the newest ones. One on individual defense, which I think is the premium skill on defense, is being able to guard and disrupt the ball one-on-one. So a video on that goes for about 35, 40 minutes, and then a video on pick and roll offense, which I was really fortunate the last 2 years. I got to work with an amazing pick and roll coach in Dirk Baumann from Germany, and learned so much about the pick and roll game and the nuances and the teaching points of it. So they can get any of those 4 videos from my website. They're really affordable in Australian dollars. They're around $10 each, which is probably $7 or $8 US. So you can buy them in bundles together. And I use players that are junior players to show all the concepts and the teaching points. So it's not like a high school coach would see something and say, oh, that's not relevant for my 8th grade team, because in some of the videos I am using 8th graders. So I really try and make it affordable and easily transferable for, the junior coach.
So talk about, from an individual defensive standpoint, what are 1 or 2 keys that you try to teach in the videos? What are the things that you think are most important for a player to learn and for a coach to be able to teach when it comes to individual defense?
Well, on top of, teaching them the concepts of, what is a good possession of defense, we talk specifically about individual defense. In the video, they'll see I use the term pulse, gap, and heat. So pulse is having your feet moving at all times. So, for instance, if you see a boxer in the ring, then their feet are stationary. They're ready to box at all times. And it should be the same on defense, is that your feet should be moving and you need to be ready to play defense before the offense is ready to play offense, because they have an advantage. They know what they're doing, you don't. So we talk about that verbal cue of pulsing. The gap we talk about is the distance between the defensive player and the ball. So again, when I watch junior basketball, a lot of times I see the kids are 2 meters off the ball, or they're all up in the offensive player's shorts, and they don't have the discipline to keep a gap and have a gap that's close enough to put pressure on the ball, but not too close to get burnt every time. And then we talk about heat, which is what we do with our hands. So how we build pressure on the ball, how we move our arms when we play defense, and how we can disrupt the ball without reaching and putting ourselves out of position. So I go through each of those concepts. I build on more concepts, so they'll see all of that in the video. They'll see my teaching points. They'll see the verbal cues, but then also a bunch of drills and the progression of drills. So, I layer the teaching points. So instead of giving them all 6 teaching points at once, we'll start with 2, then we'll add another, then we'll add another, then we'll progress to a more advanced drill. So just the way I would progress the learning through a normal training session.
Yeah, I love the progression idea. I also love the idea of taking your teaching point down to one simple cue. And I know that's one of the things that I sometimes struggle with as a coach is I'll tend to, when I'm coaching my players, I'll tend to get more wordy and give them the explanation every single time. Whereas what I probably should be doing is give them that explanation one time and then get it down to where as soon as I say the cue, they know exactly what I mean without me having to go through the whole spiel again and waste a bunch of valuable practice time. That's one of the things that I'm still trying to get better at, is using those cues. So I think the fact that you have those broken down, both with what you talked about in the club curriculum and then now in the videos, I think that's key as a coach, that if you can learn to teach in those small sound bites, you're going to be a lot more effective, because we all know that as a coach, when you're standing in front of your players and you start talking for 30 seconds, 45 seconds, those kids have tuned you out, especially the younger they are, the more likely they are to be staring off the ceiling or looking at the practice next to them or thinking about what's going on after practice. So you got to really try to cut down on that. I think if you can learn to teach in cues, as you've described, I think that's a tremendously valuable skill to be able to have as a coach.
Yeah, that's right. And really what we're trying to do is make practice as close to game specific as possible. And in a game, you just don't have the luxury of stopping the player in long spiels. The perfect possession of basketball in a game is that the players aren't reliant on an external cue like the coach. They just play. They know how to play. They play hard. They react. They go. So, that's what we need to try as coaches, is that realize that, a practice session isn't a coaching clinic, and that we want to try and make it as close to a game as possible by, of course, introducing concepts and being clear about what it is and why we do it, but then very quickly trying to get our external stimulus to the player shorter and less frequent, so they're not reliant on us. And in the last 2 minutes of a game, they're not looking over to the coach of what should I do. It's they know how to play, and if you need to give them a cue, it can be a short, quick cue that snaps them into an action without having to yell a long explanation from the sideline.
That's so important, because basketball is such a dynamic decision-making sport that by the time you've said 3 or 4 or 5 words, the decision already had to be made, and your coaching point is gone. I think that goes to another thing that I'm curious to ask you about, and that is one of the things that we struggle with here in the United States, especially on the youth level, is parents coaching their kids from the stands and yelling out what people should be doing and trying to direct their kid while they're playing. And I've been a big proponent of, if you're a parent and you're there at the game, you should maybe cheer. Most kids probably would just prefer you to be completely quiet, but certainly not be yelling instructions like you hear parents yelling all the time. And I think that goes to sort of the overarching thought process of what we've just talked about, which is, even as a coach, if I can break down my coaching into 1 or 2 word cues at the most, and then you think about this parent, father, mother that's out in the stands yelling all this, advice that A, the kid shouldn't be listening to, and then B, is probably in direct contrast to what their coach told them. It just gets confusing, especially for young kids. I think it makes it extremely difficult in a sport like basketball that moves so fast and is so reliant on making quick decisions. I think the cue concept from a coaching standpoint is so important. And then also just to make the point to parents that the things that you're yelling are not helpful to kids, because they can't process it fast enough, and they should be listening to their coach and not to people in the stands.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Like, I'm a parent myself, and I'm lucky that my kids don't play any competitive sport as yet, so I haven't been put in that situation yet. But I know
you'll get there. How old are your?
I'll get there.
How old are your kids, Liam?
I'm sure I will. 6 and 8. They're 6 and 8. So gotcha. They're just enjoying the participation level of playing basketball and other things. But it's a really good point. It's an issue that's at all levels. I think just a couple of strategies with that. If I was the coach, I would firstly ask the parent if they want to come on board and help coach, because sometimes it's hard to find assistant coaches and people who are passionate. So, it's like, I see that you're, calling out some tactics and that. It seems like you've got an interest in the game. Would you like to be on the bench with me and coach? And sometimes straight away that, can make them mindful that they are calling out a lot of things. I guess if it persists, you can talk about what we just spoke about, where we want to try and eliminate as much as we can external stimulus, because that makes the players high basketball IQ. That will help with their personal development. So that's another thing you can try. But then if it really needs to be a conversation, then I would always say, parents, we love you to be loud and encouraging in that, but just coach the effort, just reward the effort. So, great job, good try, way to sprint back, way to play hard, those kind of things, not pass the ball, So I think it's hard to parents to just be quiet. But there's definitely some strategies that I've been able to use over the years when I was a junior coach of, okay, let's try and give them some responsibility. Let's teach them about the teaching process, and then let's just try and keep it or contain it to effort areas and not just calling out people's names. It's like, great job, great defense, great rebound, not Johnny, that was you, you're the best. So maybe there's some strategies there that some junior coaches might be able to use.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think those are all good points that you make in terms of being able to educate parents, just like we need to educate coaches and educate players. In a lot of cases, parents need to be educated because they're going through the youth sports experience for the first time along with their kid. And so they don't always necessarily know what the right things are to do and how to do it. And of course, we all know that those of us that are parents, we get caught up emotionally in what our kids are doing, and we want to help them, and we want to be there to support them. And sometimes we take that a little bit too far. And so it's just important for parents out there that are listening to remember that when you're sitting in the stands, you're much better off. You're going to be a much bigger help to your kid if you're just cheering positively for your kid and for everybody else, and leave the coaching to the coaches who are over there on the sideline. Another question that I had for you, Liam, before we wrap up here is, you've, again, kind of circling back to where we started, you've had an opportunity to coach at all these different age levels and in different countries. And I just wanted you to talk about, what are some of the things that you feel are constants from a coaching standpoint across all levels of basketball? So what are things that, I don't want to necessarily say X and O concepts, but I'm thinking more of just the technique of coaching. What are some things as a coach that work with 8-year-olds that also work with the professional players that you've worked with?
It's a great question. I think just the way of explaining the game in those, the way that I've talked about with open questioning works with young kids. I think it works with pros. You get more buy-in, you get the player gets a more thorough understanding of the concept if they're involved in the learning process. I think there's some things that make your team so much better regardless of what level it is, and it starts with like effort and the team being the number one thing. So again, it doesn't matter if it's the under 12 team, how you are able to bring kids together and make the team the number one important thing. That's just as important when we're with pros. And of course, we've got different drivers when you're a professional player as to what you are a youth player, but the teams that do better are the ones that definitely put the team first. And that's a difficult exercise because you need to be able to use the players' individual goals and listen to them and help them achieve them. But they need to, at some point, put the team first. So that's been important in every country I've been to. I think just from a tactical perspective, I think shooting is the premium skill. It's the number one skill. It should be, especially as a junior coach, if you have 3 hours of practice time a week, I think half that practice time should be shooting. And that could be anything. That could be form shooting, finishing at the rim, finishing through contact, decision-making of when to shoot, volume shoot, one-on-one, but half the game is shooting. You can play poorly, shoot well and win, and you can play really well, shoot terribly and lose. So, I think it doesn't matter what country I've been in, shooting is the most premium skill, and so that should be half your practice time on court. And conversely, on defense, half your practice time on defense should be one-on-one defense. That is the premium skill on defense. So the better you can guard the ball, the less pressure it will be on your rotations, the more you can disrupt, the better you can guard pick and rolls, you can guard post players without trapping. So, they're kind of like core concepts where, wherever I go to a new program, I know that, I need to make sure that we put the team number one, and I need to have time in there for shooting and time in there for individual defense, because everything else kind of works around those things.
Yeah, I love that. Before we wrap up here, Liam, I want to give you a chance to share out how people can get in touch with you. I know you already mentioned your website, but we'll go ahead and share that out again, and just how people can reach out to you if they have listened to the podcast, they want to ask you questions, they want to find out more about the services that you offer, they want to buy your videos. So go ahead and share out your contact information, and then if there's anything else that we didn't touch on that you want to share before we get out of here, go ahead and do that as well.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. I think from all the coaches out there, I'm sure we're really happy that you provide this kind of service to us where you're sharing the game with everyone. So I do really appreciate the opportunity. If anyone wants to follow me on Twitter or Facebook, I'm at Coach Liam Flynn. And each day I generally have some kind of X's and O's or coaching tip or a drill. I definitely won't put on there what I'm having for breakfast or, holiday location photos. It's strictly business. It's strictly basketball. So, if they'd like to learn more about the game, they can do that. I always enjoy when people reach out to me. You can find my email address on my website. So if you go to coachliamflynn.com, all my contact details are there. So by all means, feel free to reach out and, let's swap ideas and talk about, basketball in all different parts of the world.
Liam, this has been an absolute pleasure. It's been great for us to learn a little bit more about basketball there in Australia. To everyone out there, we will catch you on our next episode. Thanks.
Head Start Basketball's Player Development Academy offers Cleveland area players a unique opportunity to improve their basketball skills. Regardless of a player's age, skill level, or position, training with Head Start Basketball will elevate your game to the next level. Do you want to improve your ball handling, become a better shooter, or develop into a more skilled, confident player? Our Academy classes offer training that's designed to do just that. Our training sessions are innovative and will have you learning skills that are transferable to actual games. We have 4 different class skill levels for boys and girls, ages 4 and up. All Player Development Academy classes will be held at the Strongsville Recreation Center. For more information or to get registered, please visit www.headstartbasketball.com.
Thanks for listening to the Hoop Heads podcast, presented by Head Start Basketball.